Hello. So, my name's Todd Baker, and this is something I've been wanting to do for a while. I've had a fair few people reach out over the years via my website and just on socials, etc., who are interested in game audio. Typically, sort of students and people who kind of want to get into the craft, as it were. Sometimes people asking specifics about games. I think often the Monument Valley stuff and the Outer's Odyssey stuff comes up. And I thought it'd be nice to just make a few videos with kind of deep dive looking into certain aspects of the audio on a few of these games. I kind of want to make it so it's for certainly aspiring game audio, game composer people, but also game developers more generally, and then also fans of the games more generally as well, because I think there's a sort of simplicity and accessibility around the stuff I'm going to talk about that is probably interesting and makes sense to the lay person or just the game player and enthusiast as well. For this first one, I was just going to look at the nav pings, as we call them. So these sounds, when you move the character around in Monument Valley games. And it's kind of a sound that's there throughout the whole game that I think this is right at the beginning of the game and you're likely to notice, and maybe just notice the fact that it's playing different tones and that's a playful thing. Subconsciously, or if you're a musician, you'll notice that there's a bit of a drone happening in the background here, and that tonally these notes that you're hearing when you click are in a sort of sympathetic key to the background, which is very much a key part of the approach to these games in terms of audio. If I was to move that interaction, that also has a kind of arpeggio of notes that again are shared in their key and therefore harmonious with both the nav ping and the kind of ambient drone that we've got going on in the background. I think in terms of what that means for the player, that would, again, a sound that you're going to hear over and over again, in my opinion, but I think this is true, just becomes very almost invisible after probably 5 minutes of gameplay or so. And that means that, it's a fairly prominent sound, I guess. Sometimes I think I softened it the way it feels in the mix in MV3 compared to MV2. Maybe it was a little bit heavy there, but I think you can get away with it being as present as it is, especially if you implement it right and if you're careful to make this kind of tonal tie-in happen with what's happening contextually with music in the background. Then it can be a just fairly confidently mixed sound. So let me stop this for a sec and then jump into our Wise project and have a look at just how that sounds made up first. You can see here that what we've actually got, what I made early on, was a tone library of essentially from C3 to B4. Granted, you can also pitch these around in Wise if you wanted to go beyond that. But if I play a few of these, and each of these consists of like a few variations. I mean, it may sound very similar, but if you listen carefully on one of these, they've got like a baked filtered delay. I think it's a layer of like a synth sound and a sort of metallic hit on a tongue drum. Which this tongue drum that I've got at the studio was actually kind of the main nav ping sound for MV2. So I sort of wanted to have a hint of that in MV3, but also just sort of purify it a bit with the synth sound. So that's just an example of one of them. And there's the 3 sample variations you have on every one here are just adding a little bit of sort of stereo variation and the way it's kind of hitting that filter delay. It's just slightly different, just so you don't get that like bang on sample repetition thing. And so from this library, you can build, so here's the default tones, which are the ones you hear in that first level I was just running. So you can build a set, and this is just a random container that plays a set. in the key of, I think, just C major there, because there's no sharps or flats or whatnot. You'll notice that actually on this, I've low pass filtered them. It's just kind of what worked in game and just sat in the mix better, just to make them even more mellow. And that's what you're hearing in game. But you're not just hearing that, actually. You're also hearing a common element in this default click sound, which is just a two-layered thing, essentially. So any of the nav pings, for which there are many, you can see in the event, is triggering two sounds. It's triggering that default click and the tone. So yeah, that's exactly what we would have been hearing in that prelude level we were just in. So obviously throughout the game we get different pieces of music, different vibes, and we can just make a unique event with a selection of the notes that we want for that level. So if our level is in a specific key, then we'll just choose the sympathetic notes, often like a pentatonic scale, and then that will sound harmonious with the music they hear in the background. And I just want to sort of dig into a few aspects of that. In the example we just heard then, we're just in a kind of diatonic key. But if I was to go to another level, for example, this one, and this is an example of one of the compositions that has some key modulation in it, meaning that it just doesn't stay to the same 7 notes of a scale, and there's a modulation away from this kind of diatonic harmony to a different chord. If you're a musician, you'll know what I'm talking about. So, to start off, you can hear that is a selection of notes that is consistent with the key of what we're hearing out now. But if we keep listening, and I'll keep pressing this nav ping, wait for it. So you heard there's a bit of a change there. I'll keep spamming it. You heard a little bend there. In that case, it wasn't necessarily a key modulation, which was nice to change the node selection. But here comes a proper key modulation. Keep listening. There you go. So it's this kind of major chord lift thing. And if I'd have just kept the same notes, keeping with the diatonic scale, it would have sounded pretty ugly over that chord, the ham then. So I'll jump out of that. In terms of what's happening there, it's pretty simple. The music that's triggering there, which is this that we were just hearing, and this is something that I came across more recently, you can actually trigger events embedded like markers. So as in a wise event that is the thing that triggers a sound or a state or anything. In the game, everything we trigger in the game is essentially an event or a parameter or state. But an event can trigger like as an embedded part of a music track, using the interactive music system only, actually, not in your regular actor mixer hierarchy and wise, as far as I'm aware. So the point in the track here, you'll see it's hitting a marker, and then it hits another one at the end of that section, and again on this chord, that major chord at the end of that sequence. That you can see where the markers are. And what that's actually doing is just triggering an event that sets a state. And here's our state, the commuter's waltz nav ping. That has a number of states for the various things. You'll notice that fruity A and fruity A and B are there. Obviously, that's an insight into my musical terminology there. And so what that's doing is, if we find the nav ping for that, should see. Here we go. On these individual notes, so here's our selection of notes. It's similar to the defaults we were just looking at. And we have, as part of that, our commuter's waltz different states. So different harmony there. That's kind of like an inversion lift that on the first example when I was playing the game. And this is, I mean, there's many different ways you could do this, but it's what's kind of nice about it for me is that, like, when we heard in the game, is that rather than like just saying I'm not going to play this note anymore, if you're right on a note's just been triggered, then it will actually sort of bend according to the state transition rules, which is pretty fast. It's like 0.2 of a second or something. But I actually like the fact that you hear those little adjustments in the notes in the game, rather than it just sort of, you know, be a sort of binary thing that changes selections. Again, it was a way, given our sort of fairly limited programmer support on a game like this, that you could implement that quite easily using these embedded event trigger markers in a track, as we just saw here, which is really nice. So that's just one insight into the tonality of these notes, and then using it in the case where you sort of want to, you know, modulate the key within a track. I mean, from scene to scene in a game, then you might have different pieces of music, and then it's simply a case of, like, you know, if the third section of this level here had a different piece of music, then you can just say, oh, I'm going to use this nav ping, which has this selection of notes. But the point of showing that example before is just a more complex one where you want to change it for just specific parts of the song, just so you kind of keep that harmonious feel. And just as an extension of that, something this I will credit certainly Lucy for this, because she noticed it fairly late on in the project when we were sort of a few weeks away from shipping. And if we go to the Lighthouse chapter select, get the unlock. Love the art on these. So this whole area is how you essentially create chapters. It's a lovely space. It's really fun doing the audio for this, and especially the zoom transitions when you go into, which I can show you what I mean just with one of those now. Etc. It has loaded up. Okay. And what we have in here is the ability to actually go back out into the village at any time by going through this door, which means you have control of the character, basically. And that means if you've got control of the character, then you've got a nav ping. So listen. Which in this case is sympathetic to the key, if you can call it, of these prancing flutes that is specific ambience. And now all of these, as you face each of these like stained glass windows, you're looking at, you know, you're hearing, an ambience that is a sort of hint of the chapter you're about to go to. So if we're here, then we've got this kind of darker drone. And if we listen to the nav ping, you'll only get sympathetic notes to that drone. And if we go here, so again, all of these different keys, they are harmonious with the tones of the nav ping. Now, yeah, this was noticed by Lucy because they were all the same, and we were getting some nasty clashes, which we don't want those. We did our best to make sure that you have that sense of holistic harmony about the interactions and things like these nav pings throughout the whole game. In that case, given it was quite late, again, there's different ways of achieving something like this, but what we've actually got in Wise is a parameter for the overall position of that rotational kind of field where you're looking through the different stained glass windows. So if I dig it out, it's in the Lighthouse chapter select. So here, rather than setting states, you look on this RTPC, we've got this essentially a global parameter. And again, with the interest of like not having to sort of cut off any notes or let notes hang over a key change, I like the idea that they actually kind of pitch bend in real time with your interaction. So what's happening is this C is initially pitched up on the first window, and these it's a little bit kind of hacky or fiddly, but these positions just correspond to the window that you're facing, essentially, this being all the way over on the last chapter and this being the first chapter. So basically you're just using a pitch curve to bend certain notes to be more sympathetic than others. It's actually only the F and the C that really needed much going on there, but it just means that if you're in this position, for example, then we play that, compared to if we're in this position, different set of notes. And that, again, that's a pretty simple idea. It's just a global RTPC being sent. There was a slight bug with that in that the RTPC initially wasn't getting updated until you actually interact with that kind of rotating carousel. And we fixed that by just, in that specific case, actually just making sure the value of the position was passed through as soon as that level loaded. Otherwise, it works. It works fine, really. And it's nice because the result is that, in the event that the player, probably quite an edge case event, that the player does choose to move around in that rather than just go straight into the level, then things will remain harmonious. And yeah, in terms of pitch and sort of key coordination, that's kind of like all I was going to talk about with that. And then moving on, just a couple more points with this nav ping. I mean, again, going back to that of the role and the function of this is kind of this key UI sound in the game, and something that would sort of become quite invisible to the player and just sort of subconsciously add to the ambience. It's kind of fun to subvert that in places, which we do. And I did this at one point in MV2 when the child leaves the mother and the mother's alone for the first time, and you have this kind of grayscale level where all the colors kind of sucked out of the world, and it just made sense to remove the tonality from the nav ping to reflect that. So, and tonality almost being kind of a metaphor for color in the sound world. And similar stuff happens in Monument Valley 3, so we've followed that through, but just use the idea a lot more. Let's just look at a couple of examples. So, throughout the first 2-3 chapters, all you've heard is tonally sympathetic versions of the nav ping as we were just kind of looking at. And then in, say, this village, I mean, this is essentially the same trick as Monument Valley 2, whereby bad things have just happened, and yeah, it's a similar visual trick as well, in that, this lighthouse that was kind of colourful and vibrant is moved into this grayscale thing because, as you can see, it's been sort of destroyed. Sorry, spoilers for people who haven't played the game. And then our nav ping has no tonality. It's just a bit of essentially just filtered white noise in place of where the tonality would be, and that remains until the village is, again, spoilers, is restored, essentially, which would seem like a really obviously nice thing to do. Again, having been there, whether people would notice this consciously or not, very unlikely. Having been there throughout the whole game, the absence of it, I think, is a nice little trick. And did we or did we not? We did. So even when we hold that as you go into the chapter select. As you can hear, there's no tonality there. So as I go to this, we have our tones. But when we're in this one, there's no tones. Just to, again, in the very edge case that the player actually even bothers to move around before they go into the chapter, then this is a nice touch to sort of remove that. So yeah, there's another example, narrative meaning to the absence of it. And then just to kind of finish on one more, I guess, this is an additional bit of tech actually that Lucy requested, which was a really nice touch in these kind of beautiful later levels that are more nature-based. The idea that you can walk freely here for the first time in a space rather than just be on rails or on the geo that sort of makes up most levels. The fact that you can touch this big amount of negative space that you got here, it just felt like you were sort of touching the wheat. So here Lucy's got a sort of bamboo wind chime layer to it, but there's also a wheaty kind of foliage layer, which is really nice. And then if we click up here, we still get the same absent layer. It's questionable whether it would have been almost nice to have the tone of the nav ping return when you click on there, but you don't get the wheaty foley that you're getting there, that kind of rustle, along with the bespoke footsteps obviously for that. It's just a really nice way just to kind of totally make a feature of that quite a sort of unique Monument Valley scene where you've got all of this kind of free roaming space, and that carries on throughout these levels. So whereas you can click on you can still move between the wheat and the geometry, then you should always not get the wheat layer when you click in the right place. Just all adding to that sort of subconscious sort of tactility that is such a key part of these games, and all of these interactions and stuff. So there we go. I mean, that was all I really wanted to show. Just I want to make these videos kind of reasonably bite-sized lengths, and I want to do a few more of them on different aspects of the game. I just thought the nav ping was a nice place to start. By all means, like, if you have any questions about this, like, put it in the comments. This will be on YouTube, and I'll try and get back to you. And hopefully, yeah, it's interesting and insightful for people who are interested in this stuff. And in terms of other videos, I'll try and vary the things I look at to not just be sort of in-engine, in-wise cases like this, but maybe some more specifically musical things in terms of either composition or mixing in relation to these levels and overall thoughts. But yeah, let me know if you want to see anything specific and if you think this is good and useful, because I don't really make a habit of doing like public talks and stuff, not least because it's a bit stressful, and yeah, just in terms of having a dialogue with people who are interested in what I do on projects, which I just know from the amount of feedback I've had that they are, I guess, and trying to make these kind of honest and no bullshit, for want of a better reason, in terms of just like showing how stuff is made, demystifying it, because as you can see, none of this in this case is far from sort of rocket science, and it's more just about executing on an idea well and making sure it's sort of technically robust enough. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully if this goes well, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.